Welcome to Everyday Economics, a podcast that helps you learn about the economic world happening around you every day. I'm your host, Chris Krug, president of the 501c3 nonprofit Franklin News Foundation. Everyday Economics is a production of America's Talking Network. You can check out all of our great podcasts at americastalking.com. To support podcasts such as this one, please make your tax-deductible charitable contribution by clicking the link in the show description. We are recording this episode on Thursday, December 8th. And joining me, as always, is my partner and dear friend, Dr. Orphe Divounguy. He's a PhD economist. Dr. O, unemployment claims, they're the highest that they've been.
Exactly.
Since February, anyway.
But they're on the way out. And at the same time, you look at the labor employment numbers coming out of the Bureau of Labor Statistics last week. Employment continues to outpace expectations. It grows. It keeps growing and growing and growing. And then you look at the wage numbers that spooked the markets last week. People looked at average hourly earnings and thought, oh my goodness, did they pick up pace? Could we be in trouble? Does this mean the Fed will have to hike rates by more than we expect? It's just crazy. But I think a lot of people forget that you cannot rely on 1 month of data. A lot of people forget that there are multiple surveys, right? You got your payroll survey, you got your, establishment survey, you got your household survey. You got to combine all of that stuff together. And you got to take a couple months of data to try to make sense of what's going on out there. And I'll tell you what I think is going on out.
Go ahead, yeah. Well, I want to throw some data points at you. So you can you want to offer some perspective? You want me to throw some data out there first?
Throw me your data first.
All right. So this is straight off of Forbes from today, from Forbes reporting today. And here are the 3 bullets that they led their story on unemployment with today. An estimated 1.7 million Americans filed continued claims for unemployment during the week ending November 26th. That's the highest level since February. Okay, that's number 1. Number 2, new weekly jobless claims went up to 230,000 from 225,000 the week before. So in the past 2 weeks inside of this reporting, you're talking about 455,000 people who have filed for unemployment, right? And then this comes on the heels from the Challenger, Gray, and Christmas report, where job cuts among U.S.-based employers we're up 127% in November on a month-to-month basis. So those are the 3 data points there. When I look at those, they're a little scary.
Yeah, and they point to a downturn. They point to a transition towards slower growth. And yeah, it's exactly what I was going to lead into. The U.S. economy is slowing, but I think it's important to provide context here. It's coming from being in a state of overheating back to a normal state. It's rebalancing. And even if because I hear a lot, you got the Wall Street CEOs that came out a couple of days ago saying, hey, we're looking at a mild to hard contraction. We went from the Fed trying to engineer a soft landing to a mild recession. And now we're at a mild to hard contraction. And I'm actually optimistic, to be totally honest with you. I think we were in a state of overheating. The Fed raised rates really quickly to realign demand with supply and bring inflation down. And that's what's happening, But when you look at the housing market's cooling. Rent is finally coming down. And market rent tends to lead CPI rent, which means that if we just went by that relationship, inflation will be falling, will be coming down in 2023. You look at job openings, the number of excess job openings is finally coming down, which is good, less hiring, but layoffs, if you look at layoffs haven't picked up all that much yet.
Do you feel that that's the next area that we're going to have to be paying some attention to is layoffs? I
think that with, kind of fewer workers to go around, employers are going to be very reluctant to start laying people off.
Well, the reason I ask this is that, for a lot of companies, a lot of American companies, they evaluate salaries and they look at their employees on an annualized basis, like starting at the new year. And, with the economic pressure that's been put on families, employers are and this is Certainly not something that, that my company's immune from. Because we have people that we need to pay, and we need to make sure that we're taking care of them as best as we possibly can to whatever degree we can. But a lot of my friends who run businesses are like, just don't know how we're going to manage this year. Inflation's, hanging around 8%. The last report that I saw was in October, was up 7.75% over the prior year. You start talking about having to hand out raises that are above 5%, which is, still well above what the cost of living used to be, to get people close to where they were. And it almost sounds to me like we're on the front end of a fewer, better paid philosophy being implemented, at least across some companies.
Look, it's clear workers are losing a little bit of that extra bargaining power they had accumulated during the pandemic. That's clear. But what's even clearer to me is that inflation, and you mentioned this, inflation being too high is still the biggest threat to sustainable economic growth. It's creating extreme distortions. If inflation continues at the pace it's at, we run the risk of households running out of those savings that they had accumulated during the pandemic. And then it's when that happens that we could potentially see layoffs and a deep economic contraction. But the Fed is at it. It's fighting it still very aggressively. And that's good news. So I'm optimistic that we're going to get inflation under control at least to a pace that is comfortable enough for most Americans. Because when prices come down, what I'm expecting to see is demand will stick around, because people will be able to go out there and spend without worrying so much about adding on to credit card debts and having run out of their savings. Inflation coming down is the objective here, but a lot of the signs are pointing to those numbers coming down, maybe not at the pace that we want to see, but they're coming down, and the Fed's just got to stay the course.
I appreciate the insights for Orphe Divounguy. This has been Chris Krug. Subscribe to Everyday Economics and dozens of other quality podcasts at americastalking.com.